Hello, good morning, and welcome to Newsfile. So last night, the Finance Ministry confirmed that $600 million from the International Monetary Fund hits the Bank of Ghana account. Now, that is the first tranche of a $3 billion package approved by the fund's executive board this week. It has been 10 months in the making. Already, the cedi is strengthening against the dollar, and the credibility and confidence the economy lost over the last year may be easing. Those are the positives, but this deal also comes with a huge cost. In the last 48 hours, we have been reading the program document. There will be pain ahead, removing VAT exemptions, increasing progressivity in personal income taxes, automatically adjusting fuel levies by exchange rate movement or inflation, and containing the wage bill by limiting wage increases and hiring are but a few of the challenges and burden we all must bear on this long road ahead. So this morning, we will fully explore the benefits, but also the cost, the conditions, and the impact. Now, a week ago today, the main opposition, National Democratic Congress, was already 2 hours into its presidential and parliamentary primaries. In the end, former President John Mahama won an emphatic victory. The story was, however, different for more than 15 incumbent NDC MPs who lost their primaries and will not have another opportunity to contest in the 2024 general elections. Then came the torrent of complaints from many of the winning candidates that party executives had interfered in the process in a bid to have their favorites elected. Some, like former Minority Chief Whip Muntaka Mubarak, said it will be difficult to forgive. Sam George and Felix Kwachifosu charged the Asidu Nketia-led National Executive Team to enforce discipline. And then there is the Dr. Kwabena Dufo element. So on the back of these primaries, is the NDC really ready for 2024? And how will the outcome of these primaries affect its fortunes next year? My name is Evans Mensah, and my guest and I will dissect the issues after this. Samson is away today and she'll be back next week. Stay with us. And thank you for staying with us on JoyNews, Joy 99.7 FM, myjoyonline.com, and across our social media platforms. Now, before we get down to business, I have a brief note to Samson's take. Now, last Saturday, a picture of someone else was mistakenly displayed during Samson's take for Kafui Semevo of the DVLA, who was commended as a consummate communications professional for clarifying that one has to be given 24 hours to produce their driver's license instead of impounding their vehicle unlawfully. The error is regretted. This picture is Kafui Semevo. That's a picture on your screens there. That's Kafui Semevo and the one meant to be displayed. Now, let's get down now to business. Joining me for our IMF conversation here on Newsfile today is somebody I've always looked forward to hosting myself in person, by the way, because of the way she makes economics very accessible. I was telling her just before we came on air that if she was my economist teacher, I would have become an economist instead of a journalist. Dr. Priscilla Chumesi-Bafo is an economist and senior lecturer, Department of Economics, University of Ghana, Lagos. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Yes, I missed the opportunity to be your teacher. I was several years too early, so I'm grateful that you could join me. Also joining us pretty shortly is Dr. Mohamed Amin Adam. He's a Minister of State at the Finance Ministry, and he will join us pretty soon. We'll be joined in the studio later by John Abdullahi Jinapor. He is the Member of Parliament for Yape Kusogu constituency and member of the Finance, Mines and Energy Committees of Parliament. We're grateful that you could join us. Dr. Tue Champon is an economist and political risk analyst, and he joins us via Zoom. You can see him in shot right now. I'm grateful, Doc, for joining us here on Newsfile. As I said at the beginning, later, we would also get into the NDC conversation right after the primaries. We'll be joined in that particular conversation by John Jinapor, who obviously will stay with us and do a crossover, and then Richard Ahiagba, who is a Director of Communications of the New Patriotic Party. You don't want to miss that second part. Dr. Tui Champon, as you know, is a political risk analyst. I'm sure he's been analyzing the outcome and the implications for next year. I remember in 2020, we partnered his firm to do a fantastic analysis in speaking to people and analyzing outcomes. So I'm looking forward to his thoughts on this also. So stay with us for that conversation. Let's start with the IMF program. And for those of you who may have missed the real conversations during the week, this is just to refresh your memory.
We are running a budget deficit. We are also agreeing for zero financing for that. So to continue to support the programs that we have is where the $600 million will be deployed. I think going forward, the issue of efficiency of government and efficiency of services to the people are going to be key, and therefore finding ways of ensuring that we're efficient in our deployment that we have. So that's going to be key. I think for all of us in Ghana to really internalize that there's a new era with regards to our own behavior, re-engineering, and the type of inputs that we have, moving towards food security, so the importation of rice and poultry and tomatoes, etc., are brought down, and we produce those ourselves. That really will signal a new way forward that will increase the resilience and sustainability of the program.
I'll focus my brief remarks on three issues this afternoon. First, from the perspective of the central bank, and for that matter, the government of Ghana. The approved IMF support program should not be seen as about the money alone. That is the budget support that comes with the approval. While that helps with the current reserves profile for the central bank, what matters most is the fact that the program sets out a set of policy and structural reforms that should help Ghana to reset our economic policy fundamentals, which was dislodged by the crisis over the last year or so. These deep-seated reforms should re-anchor policy and embed irreversibility in our policy outcomes and ensure that buffers are rebuilt to make our economy more resilient. The second point follows from the first, that this is now the time to begin the work. The program approval is just the beginning of the real work of building Ghana better. And thirdly, the executive board's approval of the support program yesterday, especially if you look at the time frame within which Ghana secured this approval, is an indication of the strong government's political will and commitment to the reform agenda. The painful sacrifice of Ghanaians, especially through some of the measures such as the domestic debt exchange, which has also helped us reach these conclusions very quickly. So we have reached a point where our key stakeholders should come through very quickly with their support to give meaning to the catalytic role of the fund and help build Ghana better. We see here a clear demonstration of burden sharing, including macro and structural reforms and the domestic debt restructuring. We are looking forward to and continuing to count on an expedited process to conclude the remaining negotiations on external debt restructuring to ensure that Ghana quickly gets the full benefits and complements of these reforms to underpin the policy resetting agenda. We have reached a point where our key stakeholders should come through very quickly with their support to give meaning to the catalytic role of the fund and help build Ghana better. We see here a clear demonstration of burden sharing, including macro and structural reforms and the domestic debt restructuring. We are looking forward to and continuing to count on an expedited process to conclude the remaining negotiations on external debt restructuring to ensure that Ghana quickly gets the full benefits and complements of these reforms to underpin the policy resetting agenda.
And that there is the governor of the Bank of Ghana, Dr. Ernest Adesanya. And there's something he said that struck me in all that what you just heard there, that it's not really about the money. Don't focus about the $600 million. It's about taking an opportunity of this latest IMF program to reset the economy. We'll talk about that. What should that look like? But I'm sure you know that Newsfile is brought to you by Bank of Africa, as strong as a group, as close as a partner, MTN everywhere you go, Ashasi University, educating ethical and entrepreneurial leaders for Africa, Robert & Sons Optical Services, your comprehensive eye care service provider for 31 years, My Way Insurance, dial *165# on the MTN to join, Duraplast, how you get your water matters. Remember, where Duraplast goes, water flows. And DBS Industries, roofing, fear. I will start with you, Dr. Chumesi Bafo, on what happened last night, where the money, the finance ministry confirmed that the $600 million hit our accounts. I mean, how important is that? Before we even open up, that is the first manifestation of this deal that the board approved. How important is that money, considering where we are now in the economy?
Thank you once again, Evans, and good morning to your viewers and listeners again. I believe that it is important and that the money has come at the right time. Why is that? Because as said, last week thereabout, we were aware that the reserves of the central bank was about 3 weeks of import cover. And that meant that if nothing came in immediately, possibly it could have come in with a lot of speculation and people rushing in, and the whole uncertainty around that environment is something that is not needed in economic management. So indeed, this comes in at the right time. I believe that Ghana, as the governor indicated, has a lot of goodwill globally. Everybody wants to see the shining star of Africa do well. So in terms of that, and the evidence also points that whenever we have embarked on any fund-assisted program, we excel. The challenge has always been when we exit, then what happens? The indiscipline tends to creep in, and then we do not build resilience, and then with the slightest shock, we find ourselves wanting and we go back. So I think that it came in at the right time. I mean, when you compare other countries such as Zambia and Sri Lanka and others, Ghana's deal has come in at a record time. And I think that it's not a time to celebrate. It is a call for us to take advantage of the goodwill we have to do the right things going forward. Yeah,
and that last bit is interesting because Dr. Toye Champo, I want to bring you in. You were with me on PM Express this week when Dr. Chumesi Bafo's other colleague, Professor Godfrey Bokwing, used the expression, well, it's not time to pop the champagne just yet. But the reality is, if you consider what Zambia went through, 2 years, and they're currently still struggling, to do this in 10 months, it's significant, is it not?
No, so there are two quick things to that, right? So Zambia first applied to the G20 framework in February of 2021. And then in August of 2020, they got that 38-month ECF program. So they also have an IMF program just like us, right? But what they've got to do beyond that is getting those creditor agreements, the external creditors to agree on the various reprofiling or the relief that would be granted them. And this is where they are stuck at the moment. So Ghana, likewise, we've gotten a program, we've gotten some release of funding, but all the subsequent releases of funding, they're all contingent on meeting certain program benchmarks. And one of the key things is actually getting the external creditors, both the bilateral ones, so the Paris Club in China, as well as the private creditors, the Eurobond guys, to agree to some form of, restructuring of the terms. So that's the distinction there, that both of them have a fund program. Both Ghana and Zambia have got to do a debt restructuring exercise. And if probably there's any lesson from Zambia, is the fact that the external debt restructuring exercise often can be complicated. And when you look at Ghana's one, with what we have committed ourselves to under this IMF program, the very first table under the summary document, that 126-page document that they produced, right? There is a table there that shows you the proposed program financing commitments. And between 2023 and 2026, we have a financing gap of $15 billion. In 2023 alone, it's $4.2 billion. Out of that $4.2 billion, $1.7 billion is going to be coming from the IMF, the World Bank, and other sort of financing partners. But $2.5 billion, so that's 60% of that $4.2 billion, is financing that we haven't gotten yet. It's all contingent on the conclusion of the external debt restructuring. So those deferred interest payments and principal, or you name it. And if we're not able to get those monies coming in, $2.5 billion in 2023, another $2.2 billion in 2024, and so forth and so on, then we might then become stuck in the same process as Zambia and others, are struggling with. So that's just a bit of clarification there.
Dr. Chubesi, he's right. I mean, because you look at the point 3 under the release that came in, it says securing timely debt restructuring agreements with external creditors will be essential for the successful implementation of the new ECF arrangement. And in other words, yes, we have the deal, 600 million had come in, but to get anything more, it would be critical now to get external creditors to agree. But many will say, well, if you look at the commitment from China and the Paris Club, of course, then you have to go to the Eurobond, investors also to try and restructure. Should this be of concern, considering Tue Champon's point about the Zambia example? They're still stuck now because, yes, they got the deal like us, but they haven't received the funding yet because they haven't managed to restructure fully.
Essentially, I acknowledge Theo's concern, and I believe that in terms of restructuring of the external debt, it is not as easy or simple as compared to the domestic debt restructuring, where essentially it got to the point of whether it's a take it or leave it situation. The external debt restructuring, it's a difficult one. You are dealing with different parties. With the bilateral creditors, I believe that there is still, at the moment, the Ghana has put a moratorium on servicing office debt and all that, declared bankruptcy in that regard. When it comes to commercial creditors, I know that the government would have to deal with, for example, the London Club, where you are looking at individual commercial creditors. It's a bit tricky, but there are different approaches. I would tread on a more optimistic perspective that indeed it will be difficult, but I think that when we get our act together and get to organize things, it shouldn't be an impossibility. The fact that Zambia is struggling to deal with it should serve as a lesson to us for us going forward. I think there are a number of issues that are there. Are we going for debt conversion, for example? What are the implications? Essentially, I mean, we are doing this for the first time as a country, so it's uncharted waters. Yeah. But I think that whatever it is, we have a deal, at least on the reserve side now. There is no pressure on our balance of payment position. We can organize a few things domestically whilst we proceed on the foreign aspect. But in all this, I think that as a country, what lessons are we learning? I think it is critical. We should not get to this point again.
Yeah, and I'm going to come to that. I'll start with the Bank of Ghana's caution that don't just, celebrate that the money had arrived, but take the opportunity this time to reset the economy. And he laid out what that would look like. Guess who has joined me in the studio? Hello, John Jinapo. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
Good morning.
Good morning.
You good?
Well, it's not easy, it's tough, but we're managing.
Well, I mean, when we say, the toughness is about to ease a bit, right? I mean, the deal is here. 600 million hit the Bank of Ghana account last night. The path to recovery is now clear. Come on.
Which burden is going to reduce? I want to know. Is it the cost of living? Is it prices, wages, taxes? We're talking of the ordinary Ghanaian. What is going to lessen in terms of burden on the ordinary Ghanaian? You see, it's not about how fast a deal has been reached or how slow it has been reached. It's about the impact of this document on the ordinary Ghanaian. If you spend 3 months buying a rickety car, and I spent 6 months buying a robust, strong car, you dare not tell me that because you spent 6 months buying a rickety car, you are better off. Don't forget, if you look at page 5, our import cover had reduced to 0.5 months of imports. That is how bad the situation was. Look, this country was on the verge of collapse. It simply meant that our balance of payment position has been so decimated, so precarious that if the IMF had not come in immediately, this country would have just, and it has rippling effect. Normally when Ghana goes through this, the shock waves goes to other countries. And the IMF is very cautious of that. And that is why some of the conditions precedent have been converted to conditions subsequent. We were supposed to restructure our debt before the IMF program. That was the situation. But now they've decided that, look, throw some 600 at them and let's see how they can restructure the debt. Even the domestic component that Doc says might not be so difficult. We haven't been able to achieve that. That's a fact.
But they finished it.
The minister has just written. He's written that there will be another round to pensioners. He wrote, even after the so-called 85%.
They've made a proposal to the pension fund.
Why is he making that proposal? He signed off and said, as for pensions, won't touch them. Reduce the threshold, achieve 85% of the reduced threshold, not the original target. Don't forget there was an original target. Realizing that there was upheaval, he exempted pensioners and then exempted some bondholders. And then out of that amount that was left, he achieved 85 and started jubilating. Went to the IMF, came back and wrote a letter that no, we have to sit down again. So even the and it's in the document. If you read the document properly, it tells you that the domestic component is not over yet. So even the domestic component that you have a foothold of, government has not been able to deal with that. The external portion.
I guess you can divide into two. The first part is complete and sealed. In their conversation with the pension funds, when the exemption, they had a clause in there that says they will re-engage in accordance with the fiscal measures going forward, etc. That is what they've triggered in these conversations with them to bring them back. And I know that it's been considered. There are various views on it.
The domestic bonds themselves are not even being serviced.
They've paid quite a bit of that, the coupons.
I'm saying that the coupons have not been paid.
Not all, of course.
Yes, so there's a problem there. Yeah. Government is defaulted even with domestic coupon payments. Yeah. And in finance, normally, government will not default on domestic coupons. Worst case scenario, they'll print more money. For the first time in my life, I'm hearing government default in this manner with domestic bonds. This is the first time. I've never seen that. It is the first time I'm seeing government default when it comes to domestic coupons under the Fourth Republican dispensation. Put that aside. The foreign component, government on the 19th of December 2022 unilaterally decided it won't pay again. It's not been paying. Government has not been servicing its external component of both commercial and bilateral. And in this document, and strangely, I don't know why they choose to do so, they would exempt the multilateral component from the debt restructuring. And the multilateral component has to do with the IMF, the World Banks, and those. But as for the bilateral and the commercial, i.e. the Euro bonds, they've stopped servicing the debt and they want to go for a renegotiation. So first of all, you are going to the table with very bad faith. The minister went to China and came back empty-handed. He went to China. So look.
But now China has agreed, and together
we
with the Paris Club,
we don't know
to give
where
the
we're going
financial
to get
assurances.
to. We don't know where we're going to get to. And like Dr. Teo rightly pointed out, he referred to, I think his table, I will extract the table even as I talk. There's a table that tells you of the funding gap. 2023 is 4.2 billion, 2024 3.3 billion, 2025 4.2 billion, 2026 3.2 billion. And the financing from external debt restructuring moves from 2.4 billion, 2.1 billion, 3.1 billion, close to 10 billion. You must achieve that debt restructuring. That is not a small task. And I don't know why they agreed to it. It's not a small task. But when you even come to Ghana here, utility tariffs must be increased or adjusted quarterly. Taxes, individual taxes must be adjusted upward. The Bank of Ghana has committed that to keep increasing the prime rate to fight inflation. It is here. So you are going to have monetary tightening, and you are going to have fiscal tightening as well. And if you read the Bank of Ghana's Monetary Policy Committee report, investments has reduced from 80 billion to 64 billion. So you are beginning to see the pass-through effect of these tight fiscal consolidation measures. Even wages, they've committed that they will not be increasing wages in a commensurate manner. So you're going to see your taxes go up. You're going to see your wages not being increased in a commensurate manner. You're going to see petrol at the pumps, diesel going up. You're going to see electricity tariffs going up. So we're going to push more people into the poverty bracket. So when you read this document carefully, it tells you that government must prepare for social unrest and social upheaval.
And we'll come to drilling down the specifics as to how it relates to you. But we'll also look at their positives. I mean, one of which we'll discuss, the cedi is beginning to stabilize. So they are looked at the graph.
But don't forget about the cedi stability.
Yeah, I'll come to that substantively.
Bilaterally,
I'll come to that
decide
substantively.
that you won't service your debt.
Yeah, I'll come to that substantively.
Your currency will stabilize.
I'll come to that substantively as we begin to dissect it a bit more. But Dr. Mohammed Amin Adam, Minister of State Finance Ministry, joins us on phone. Thanks, Dr. Amin Adam, for your time on Newsfile.
Well, thank you, Ivan.
I mean, let's start with what happened last night. I mean, you can confirm, can you not, that the 600 million hit the accounts, all right?
Yes, 600 million hit the accounts of the Bank of Ghana yesterday.
Okay, good. And how is government taking this in terms of the use to which you want to put that immediately?
Well, I think that we've explained that the program has two multifaceted outcomes that we expect to achieve. Number one, we want to be able to promote growth, and therefore the money will be used for budget support. But at the same time, we want to also strengthen our balance of payment position. And to that extent, the money is coming through the Bank of Ghana. The Bank of Ghana will supply the equivalent to the government use in the budget. And so you are going to start seeing some relief in terms of financing in the budget. So we are able to meet the financing gap of the budget. And then also we should expect the cedi to get stronger and stronger. Already over the last 6 months, Bloomberg has reported that the cedi is the best performing currency out of 150 currencies across the world. And so with the flow of the IMF money and other resources that will flow into the country, we expect the currency to get stronger and stronger.
Yeah, I mean, and yesterday, the finance minister at the press briefing, this must have been on Thursday, made the point that the 600 million, once it hits, will be used for financing programs. Can you clarify that? When you say financing programs, what did he mean?
Well, the budget has programs and projects which already have been approved by Parliament. And when we talk of budget support, we have a financing component. Of course, there's a deficit that we have to finance, and would have gone to borrow to finance that deficit. And so with the IMF money coming in, it will go to support same projects, road projects, railway projects, medical facilities, telecommunication, etc., etc. So these are the projects that have been approved already in the budget.
Okay, clarify again for me. I asked that because the primary reason we were told for going to the IMF was to get balance of payment support, and where if you look at the IMF document, it specifies how precarious our reserves are currently and import cover, etc. If you're going to use the 600 million for roads and projects, etc., that possibly doesn't address the primary challenge, the existential threat of the import cover and the reserves question. Can you reconcile that?
No, I think in the past, the IMF support has gone to provide balance of payment and support. The Bank of Ghana will just receive the money and then use that to build their reserves. Now you're having two full benefits. The money comes to the Bank of Ghana account, and the Bank of Ghana will also give cedis. And it is not just on the spot. The cedi, the release of cedis by the Bank of Ghana is going to be over time. And so you certainly will have the reserve position being strengthened, while you also receive the cedi equivalent of the dollars to be received by the Bank of Ghana to finance programs and projects approved in the budget.
That's a very important clarity, and I'll get Doc's reaction to that. But first to you, now he's giving clarity what the money will be used for, roads, etc., and projects.
I've just opened to the budget appendix 3A, summary of central government operations 2023, page 189. Are you confirming on this program today that this 600 million would be used for road construction payments, like you are saying? Can you confirm that on authority on this program so that we have that on record?
I think he said that.
No, I just want him to clarify that.
Well, I didn't hear what I said.
But he said that.
Please, can you I just want that because it's not here.
Did you hear what I said?
I don't see that here. I've checked.
No,
look.
if you didn't hear what I said, that is fine. But
okay, I didn't hear. Can you re-echo that for us?
The public heard what I said.
Yeah, I mean,
I'm a panelist. I didn't hear. I'm a panelist.
No, I mean, I did because of the public. Let me do that. He said that he mentioned a host of things, including roads.
So it's confirmed that the minister says this 600 part of it will be used to pay for road construction.
Yeah, it includes roads. He mentioned that.
So we'll get that in the budget outcomes. I know that will not happen, but let's keep that.
Okay, let me quickly get clarity on that. Dr. Chumesi Bafo, so now we have clarity on what the 600 million will be used for, and that's an important point. Now the minister has said a host of things, including government infrastructure and programs, including roads, etc.
Essentially, my understanding of the IMF program is that it's a balance of payment support that the funding comes in for. So the BOG will receive it, and then in that regard, it will support our foreign reserves position, and then we will use that in the management of the foreign exchange market and interventions here and there. But indeed, it is funding that is coming in, and it is not just going to sit in the vault of the Bank of Ghana, but I know that it also comes in a form of, it can also come in a form of budgetary support. But from what the minister is saying, I'm not too clear, because there is also the World Bank support in this deal, where I have read that the World Bank is targeting a $900 million support to the budget, because essentially there is a financing gap in the budget based on the fact that Ghana does not have market access. So it needs to be filled. And in that regard, that is what needs to be done. But I am a bit not too clear with regards to this funding going into road construction and infrastructure.
Thankfully, the minister is on, so let's get that clarity for you. Dr. Mensah, do you want to try and give Dr. Chumesi for some clarity on it?
Yes, of course. So the money is coming through the Bank of Ghana, and as I speak, we all know that the money landed in the account of the Bank of Ghana. But the Bank of Ghana will give the equivalent when we call on it, because you call on it to also support your budget. And if you read the IMF program document very well, there is budget support component of it. And so it is a fact that even though it's coming through the Bank of Ghana, and the Bank of Ghana will also release it to the government, the purpose of the government taking this money is to be able to use it for budget support. We have the financing component of our budget, 2023 budget. And this is why we continue to say that the IMF program has catalytic effect. Because of our application for the IMF-supported program, the World Bank also, started negotiating with us for additional budget support, $900 million to be disbursed in equal tranches of $300 million every year, which is also coming to support the financing gap in the budget. There are so many other sources that we are looking at. We are engaging other multilaterals, we are engaging bilaterals, and also we want to be able to increase our own domestic effort in order to finance the gap in the budget.
Okay. Dr. Chui Champon, your take on this?
So I think Honorable is very right. The money comes to the central bank first. It's received in dollars. Central bank would keep some portion for bolstering the reserves and help stabilize the city, and then subsequently some other portions of the money would be released to the Ministry of Finance or the Treasury for different items in the budget. As to the specifics of that, I don't know. But what is really important, I think, is that this initial funding that we've gotten is just a temporary fix, in the sense that it's like being sick. You've gone to the hospital, you've been given morphine to help ease the pain. But beyond that, you've got to take some dose of heavy antibiotics to cure the ailment. And any other funding that we're going to be getting, whether from the IMF, whether from the World Bank or other development partners, is all contingent on us meeting the program targets. That's very, very important. So when the next review is done in a couple of months, if you look at the document and the targets in there towards the end of the year, if we have not met most of those core quantitative and the structural sort of benchmark reform targets, then it becomes difficult to get those additional tranche of money, coming in that regard.
Okay. I want to now drill down to some of the specifics, and because the minister is with us, he can break it down, because many people are reading and some are either alarmed and they are feeling they'll be paying down the line, or you're looking at the benefits as we've seen the city beginning to stabilize a bit more. And as Guta and co have said, confidence will come back. But let's start with some of the issues that most Ghanaians will identify with and need explanation. The first one is on page 10 of the program document that talks about containing the wage bill by limiting wage increases and hiring. I bring that up first because obviously, I mean, that Labour and TUC, has always warned that if the IMF program document comes and they see this one in it, Dr. Amina, that you are in trouble. So please take time to explain what this is in reality. What would this manifest in reality? How will this manifest in reality? Containing the wage bill by limiting wage increases and hiring. And the IMF says this will save you some 0.5% of GDP.
Look at the document and all the negotiations we have done. There is nowhere there is a statement that there is a freeze in employment. We are not going to do that. But this is not also different from what we have been doing. For the past 2 years, recruitment in the government side have focused on the security agencies and the teachers and then also nurses, etc., etc. And these are critical institutions, and the job they do also very critical to our development efforts. And you know that the recruitments are backed by financial clearance. That is when government is able to finance their wages, then the clearance is given. And so that will continue as and when we are able to do that. But there's no explicit decision that there will be a freeze in employment. And so to the extent that we are able to manage this recruitment and also the clearance, we should be able to contain the wage bill. Also, if you monitor over the last 2 years, recruitments into these sectors that I mentioned have been massive, have been unprecedented. Whether you are talking about the security agencies or you are talking about the health professionals and nurses and teachers, more than 2 million people have been recruited into these areas. And therefore, even if you are not able to recruit sooner, you should have the numbers that will be able to support these institutions and the development efforts of our country.
Okay, and those recruitments, I guess it's important to note, happened before the approval. Now going into post yesterday when you got the money, this is what you have to I guess stick by. So when it says contain the way by limiting wage increases, I mean you're limiting it. It doesn't say don't increase, but it says limit. How is government going to interpret that? If next year, and definitely TUC will come and say we want to want more wages, and then it also says limit hiring. And I want an important clarity. The last time we went to the IMF, there was an exception created for essential services like the health sector and education in the limiting of the hiring. I wonder whether there's an agreement with the IMF going forward that whilst we are limiting hiring in the health and education sector, for example, there will be an exception such as we had in 2015.
You know that the wage negotiations are always done, by the social partners. And for this year's budget, the negotiations were done before even the budget was approved. And so when you budget, what we are going to prevent is to do extra budgetary spending. And so to the effect that there is need for more hiring for wage increases that are not budgeted, the social partners, I believe, will continue to cooperate with government so that we don't go off the budgetary target.
Okay. Dr. Chumesi, that's an important point for all workers, including yourself. So when you read that, you've heard the explanation. How do you assess this particular, I guess, program requirement that we'll have to meet to save us 0.5% of GDP?
Right. I think that this conditionality is not new. It's always been under almost all our IMF programs. The reason being that the wage bill takes a significant chunk of government resources. And so for that matter, whenever we are able to control the rate of growth in the wage bill, then possibly some resources can be saved. But for me, like you rightly said, most of the times exceptions need to be made, particularly in critical areas such as health and education. You would want to make exception to replace, for example, retiring labor, to make sure that there are no deficits created in critical sectors. And I think that that is something that is done under usually most IMF programs, but you would not find a wholesale employment into the security services and others when we are under a program because you need to contain the wage bill. And you do that by either containing salaries that people are taking or by reducing the number that is being
I know you're smiling, so I was wondering, I mean,
yes,
it will affect you,
I know, essentially I am, because we are also dealing with the situation of high inflation. So you see, in essence,
how do you balance that?
Exactly. Labor, it's really in a precarious position, in a sense that as prices are increasing, your real wage, at the end of the day, how much your salary affords you now is just about a half of what it used to do. And I understand why labor union would be up in arms in trying to find out the clear position of government. But the reality is that, yes, I mean, IMF programs have always come with a lot of negative impact on the ordinary Ghanaian, the ordinary worker and all that. And for me, my position is that that is what we need to learn, important lessons, so that periodically we do not find ourselves back here, because we find that the cycle is always about 4 years maximum. We are back looking for a deal. We need to find sustainable solutions to this, so that we do not over time keep inflicting such difficult economic circumstances on the citizens.
I mean, John, this is standard IMF conditionality, right? I mean, you had a version of it in 2015, so I'm not sure you have a problem with this. Everybody expected this will be in it.
You see, the reality is that workers are going to struggle. Living conditions are going to be tough. And so let's not play around it and say it's the usual thing. It's not the usual thing. If you read the document very well, it's quantitative. It says 0.5% of GDP. So it's a target that you ought to meet. Capital expenditure, 0.9%. It's providing around 0.9% of GDP of savings. Rationalization, goods and services spending, 0.3% of GDP. So these are quantitative targets that the IMF will be measuring. And the statement goes further to say that when you do not meet it, in the mid-year review, you must take steps to reflect those variances in order to come back. So let nobody present it to us as if it's the normal way of doing things. And I've been hearing these 2 million jobs, 2 million jobs. I don't know what that means. I have the budget here. And the budget for me is the most authentic document for me. If you go to page 230, Appendix 7, 2023, total government budget ceiling, staff strength, 804,000. It is there. It is in the budget. It's not a political statement. And the budget is debated and adopted. This is what both sides of the House, the entire House, adopted. 804,000 total staff strength. I don't know where this 2 million is coming from. 2 million of what? Is it gross figures? Is it current employment? Is it what? The current total staff strength, the ceiling, that's the 2023 ceiling. Government says that even if it employs so much, it has to end at 804,000. So look, let's not create this impression as if this IMF program is going to lessen so much of a burden. Rather, we have to take some tough, difficult decisions for the next 3 years. The question is, how do we navigate this very difficult path? I think that should be the narrative, that should be the discussion. And Dr. Tio Champon has enumerated some of the difficult things that the IMF expects us to undertake before the next tranche is released. So it's like they've given you some palliative care, whatever you choose to call it, to tame your temperature, but you must take those very difficult and tough decisions.
One of them, and I want to get Dr. Amin Adam's take on this so that we can all, as we go, I wanted to just break it down so you all appreciate and go forward. 2 days ago, the Finance Minister was actually appealing to all Ghanaians to support the program. But to do that, you need to understand what it means. And so let's go to the other one that affects every single soul in this land called Ghana. And it's in the document. It says, automatically adjust fuel levies by exchange rate movement or inflation. Immediately you hear fuel, you know that you are in dangerous territory. So, Dr. Amin Adam, this particular clause, when it comes to the what they call the medium-term revenue strategy, which they expect that cabinet should approve very soon. The requirement for government now to implement this automatic adjustment in fuel levies by exchange rate movement or inflation. How is this different from the current deregulator regime that we have? Is it the same or this is different?
Well, first of all, the 2 million employment John Jinapor talked about, he is referring to government staff levels. As if all the recruitment as a result of government programs are all coming into the formal government sector. 2 million employment, government is doing too many projects around the country. So apart from the people who are recruited into the formal government sector, there are people who are also recruited to undertake projects funded by government. And so you should understand the context of the 2 million people who have been employed over the last few years that we've been talking about. But secondly, I do appreciate that we will have to do things different from the way we did things. It's not going to be business as usual. And so, yes, workers and Ghanaians all over will have to bear with us. But in doing this, we are also very sensitive to the plight of the people, especially the poor and the vulnerable. And so in this particular program, there's a heavy component on social intervention that we negotiated into the program. LEAP, for example, has been doubled, and we are going to increase funding on LEAP. We also are going to also spend more on school feeding program. It's also doubled. NHIS, senior high school program, is going to continue. And so, even though we will have some difficulties, we have been very careful in negotiating this program to ensure that the very vulnerable segments of our society, not the likes of Jinapor, but those who are affected directly by government policies, they are also given safety net so that we can uplift them. As far as the wages are concerned, Dr. Tumasi mentioned that they may have to call for some consideration because inflation is high, prices are going to increase, and when that happens, there is need for adjustment in the salary. I appreciate that, but we all know that this program is also intended to achieve macro stability, and so we are working to reduce inflation. We are working to ensure that inflation goes further down to single digit. We've recorded single digit before. Before COVID started, we had single digit growth was at 7%. The exchange rate was very stable, and so we want to go back to the period before COVID. And so there may not be that case for prices to increase. That may warrant consideration for adjustment in salaries from 54% by end of last year. It's currently 41%, and it's going to further go down. Let me also add that the difficulties we're talking about, even if we didn't go to the IMF, we would have been asked by the policies we've taken through the budget to adjust ourselves, because some of the measures have already been front-loaded into this budget. And so when people say there will be increases in taxes here and there, we already have front-loaded them in the 2023 budget, and we're going to continue to, improve on the efficiency of the collection. We're going to continue to expand the tax net. The property rate that we are trying to do to bring in some money. EVAT is being pursued seriously. We are also reforming the e-levy in order to improve collection. And so they have been front-loaded already. And to the extent that we can work so hard with the support of Ghanaians to be able to realize our revenue objectives will help in bringing down.
On the revenue bit, my substantive question, I'll return to that shortly. But on the revenue bit, because you brought it up, you're saying that...
Before you come, let me just answer directly your question on...
No, I'll come to that. I'll come to that because you just said revenue. So let me just ask one further clarity on revenue. Categorically, you're saying there'll be no new taxes.
I didn't say that. I said that people are saying that there will be tax increases here and there.
Okay.
And I'm saying that we have already front-loaded some of this in the 2023 budget. And so what we have to do is to make sure that we collect. And we are going to improve on our efficiency in the collection. We're going to also expand the tax net further so that those who are not paying, we want to go after them so that we can be able to improve.
So that is improving efficiency. But I guess any clarity to the question, let me just rephrase it. Are we going to have fresh taxes?
Well, I mean, we are now developing what we call the medium-term revenue strategy.
Yes.
The medium-term revenue strategy, depending on the conditions as we go forward, will define what the government tax strategy will be going forward.
Okay, good. Now let's address the substantive, and I'll come to that. Please make notes on the revenue.
Okay, so you were talking about automatically adjusting.
It says, I just want to quote it. It says automatically adjusting fuel levies by exchange rate movement and inflation. What does that mean exactly in the context of the deregulated regime?
Yeah, it is the same as we have also in the electricity sector. And we are trying to, move away from the regime where these prices were done arbitrarily, to a more, macroeconomic induced adjustment. And so, as I indicated, whilst inflation continues to go down and the exchange rate stabilizes and the cedi becomes stronger, you should expect a downward review. For the first time in the history of our country, transport fares have been reduced by transport operators. I mean, this is because fuel prices are reflecting inflation, are reflecting exchange rates, are reflecting what the deregulated regime has defined for us to follow in terms of not just fuel pricing but also electricity pricing. PURC announced an increase in tariff adjustment, but we are also aware that, as they have announced in their statement, they are trying to recover forex under recoveries from previous adjustments. But with inflation coming down and the exchange rate stabilizing, we should expect future adjustments to be lower and lower than they have been in the past.
Okay, and on the transport matter this morning, the GPRT, they've withdrawn the 10% increase decrease, the reduction because of controversy over, whether you should implement it. And I think the analysis they gave for withdrawal is because they didn't factor in the spare parts component, which is still an issue. So it's this morning.
Well, I think that may be pressure coming from their members, but the reality is that they announced a 10% decrease in fares. We may have to engage them to find out the reason for, and they gave reasons for that, why they announced a 10% reduction in fares. We may have to engage them to find out what new developments have occasioned the withdrawal of that announcement.
I want to bring in Dr. Tue Champon. Doc, so first, and there's a revenue one that the minister had clarified, but quickly take for me the automatic adjusting fuel levies by exchange rate movement and inflation, which is just explained there. If you're going to do that, and the anticipation is that the cedi is going to stabilize significantly going forward, which is a huge factor in the price volatility when it comes to fuel on the market, that is good in the long term, is it not? If the cedi stabilizes and continues to strengthen, because then you're going to see automatic adjustments that will mean reductions. Is that how you're reading this?
And implementing this automatic regime for a very long time now, so it's nothing new, like Honorable was saying. What should or what we didn't do, if you recall, during the pandemic, fuel taxes and these levies and electricity prices should have gone up, right? But we did not make those increases or adjustments for well about 1.5 going into 2 years. So by the time we made the first adjustment, we're already catching up with 2 years worth of reduction in value as a result of the inflation going up. And then there's been some subsequent adjustments as well. But going forward, it's all really predicated on the fact that if you get inflation under control and even the prices of the product also comes down, then the pass-through of that into electricity tariffs or even for fuel prices at the pumps begins to come down. But I struggle a little bit to see how that will come down, at least in the short term. So inflation now is about 40 or so percent. And under the IMF program conditions that we've signed with the fund, Table 2, which is titled Performance Criteria and Indicative Targets, by December of this year, inflation should be within a central band of about 29%, and then March it comes down to about 26.9%. So basically, we need some big incremental reduction, or actually big reduction in inflation levels for us to meet those program targets, and for that subsequently to feed through into a reduction of prices at the pumps or when it comes to buying utilities. But the structure or the pricing setup has always been there anyway under the automatic formula, just that we were not implementing it in a consistent manner. On the revenue question that you asked, paragraph 24, I think page 13 of the document, when I listed them, I could count 7 different, tax reforms, or let's call it more broadly, domestic revenue mobilization initiatives. So the first one is removing some of the exemptions that we give on VAT, and that's meant to give us or save us 2% of GDP. The second thing is reforming of the corporate income tax regime. And there the issue is that the way we give the tax holidays, the way we give, again, exemptions, and even some of the companies tend to engage in some aggressive profit shifting. So if you do some reforms there, again, you can make some savings. Then there is something around customs exemptions. So what happens at the ports? There is stuff to do with personal income taxes that needs to be more progressive. We've discussed the fuel levy. The 2 other probably new ones that I think is featuring in this conversation, but subject to more stakeholder consultations, is the introduction or the adoption of a new tax fiscal regime for the extractive industry. And I'm sure Honorable would know a lot about this.
Yeah.
We've been working within that space, and I support that call. But of course, we need to see the details. The take home for all of these conversations is that at the end of the day, if you look at the macro numbers that we need to attain by the end of this program in 2026, for our revenue and grants, we need to move it from 15.7% as of 2022 to 18.7% by 2026. So that's basically an upward adjustment of 3 percentage points of GDP, right? So that has to go up. And then on the expenditure side, we need to cut expenditure, the primary expenditure, which does not include your interest payments. So that needs to be moving down from 19.3% to 17.2% by 2026, or negative 2.1% percentage point reduction. This is where I think it gets interesting, because again, if you look at the size of the adjustments that are required, one, if you look at our own behavior as a people and as government in the past, where we commit to these targets, but we're unable to really meet all of them. And number 3, given the prospect that there's an election next year on the horizon, you begin to wonder if these, really aggressive targets that the government has committed itself to would be met, because you need to make some really sizable adjustments. If you look at the document, they've got to make an adjustment of about 5% of GDP over 3 years, and about 2/3 of that, right, 66%, have to be done in this year going into next year. And with an election around the corner, I begin to wonder if that could really be fully attained in that regard.
And I'll get the minister's take on that, the commitment there, but Mr. Jinapo.
Comments with you.
Yeah, okay.
You see, it's important that we put things within perspective. For instance, if you take employment issues in Ghana, the latest World Bank report, which is the latest on Ghana, Ghana is faced with 12% youth unemployment and more than 50% underemployment, both higher than overall employment rates in sub-Saharan Africa. So if you take the sub-Saharan African average.
Which date?
This is 2020. I've sent it to you.
2020.
A new World Bank report titled Youth Unemployment Programs in Ghana.
Okay.
Options for Effective Policy Making and Implementation. I've sent it to you. So clearly, when it comes to unemployment, it's on the ascendancy. So already, we are grappling with a very, very difficult situation when it comes to unemployment. So these figures I keep hearing, they should show some impact. When government implements policy, the policy is aimed at achieving a certain objective. So if you say you've done so much, it should show in the end result. And we should see some tangible evidence that we can relate to when it comes to that policy. On the contrary, we are seeing unemployment rising, underemployment rising. And now we are moving into a program which further tightens the economy. Now, Dr. Tio Echampong was talking about some of the targets. If you read the Bank of Ghana's latest Monetary Policy Committee report, provisional data on budget execution indicates a higher overall broad fiscal deficit on cash basis. 8.1% is against a target of 6.3%. We missed it. Revenue target, we missed it. Expenditure target, we missed it, which brought an overall deficit of 49 billion, which was financed by the Bank of Ghana. Fortunately, now there's Kumo sitting at the Bank of Ghana. So based on those reforms, they now have to come to Parliament for us to enact legislation that will ensure that there's zero financing. So when we say, oh, nothing has changed, the IMF program is just coming to consolidate what we're doing, it is not coming to consolidate what we're doing. It is coming to correct the wrong things that we were doing as a country. You can't take a Bank of Ghana financing of over 70 billion and throw it into an economy the size of Ghana. It will heat up the economy. And that's why you are seeing food inflation today at about 60%. When you hear the average inflation, it's all the goods brought together. But when you begin to disaggregate them, then you begin to see the real impact on the ordinary Ghanaian. So when food inflation is at about 60%, it gives great cause for worry. Now you're going to be increasing fuel prices. You're going to be increasing electricity prices. It means that your headline inflation is going to shoot up. It will have a pass-through effect, which will then affect the ordinary Ghanaian. So we're in very, very difficult moments. Look, not quite long ago, and I always come to the issue of credibility. The issue of credibility for me is very, very important. We were told that we had so much excess capacity that we didn't need that amount of power. June 2022, the AXA deal expires, 370 megawatts. This government has extended that contract by 15 years. I've sent the contract to you. Just check, I've sent it to you. That's it. I scan every document that I get. It's an 86-page document with take or pay clauses. As if that is not enough, they signed a new deal of 207 megawatts. Fresh one with take or pay clauses. And if you read the World Bank report, it says that, look, there are three issues. One, capacity. Two, exchange rate losses. And three, cost-reflective tariffs. When the government and the PSU appeared before Parliament, I asked them, are our tariffs cost-reflective? They insisted that the tariffs were cost-reflective. The IMF says the tariffs are not cost-reflective. So adjust them progressively. The IMF is cautious of the fact that you can't just do a wholesale adjustment. So these adjustments we are seeing is to even bring us back to parity first. That's what these adjustments are about. That look, there's a huge deficit in respect of the cost of production, your collection, and the tariff itself. So do it in a graduated manner on a quarterly basis so that by the end of 2023, you would have caught up and then keep at bay with inflation. So look, we are in for real trouble as we go forward. And the IMF is looking at two main things, the current account balance and then the primary balance. Because government likes reporting trade balance. But if you have a positive trade balance, it doesn't mean the money is coming to Ghana. You rather ought to go and look at the current account. That is where you see what Ghana is really getting in terms of real money payments and receivables. And that keeps widening from negative 5.1 to about 7% thereabout. I'll just check. So they insist that over that period, you must bring that current account deficit to an appreciable level that can anchor whatever we are doing. So look, every Ghanaian who is watching this program, I have only one advice for you. Tighten your belt.
A fair conclusion, Doc? Is that a fair conclusion that people should tighten?
Essentially, I think that the fact that we are making an attempt to restructure and get the economy back on track, these are not great times. So there are tough times ahead. And for me, particularly with the automatic adjustments and all that Theo indicated, these are policies that exist, but there have been interruptions here and there. I think that that is also, in one way or the other, these are some of the negative adverse impacts of IMF programs that over the years have made them a bit unpopular because it tends to push a lot of people in poverty. And so when you look under this program, they are a bit sensitive on the social impacts, trying to look on the leap side and all that. But really, the challenge is that these are not great times. And for me, given that inflation rate is that high, the automatic adjustments, it goes both ways. So for instance, the central bank is committed to reducing the rate of inflation through using tight monetary policies, increasing the rate. Increasing the rate means persistently increasing the cost of credit. And that also feeds into cost of production. So you see, in trying to reduce the inflation rates, and now there would be this strict automatic adjustment with inflation. So it means that the prospects for reducing inflation in the shortest possible time is not something that is likely to be achieved. And when you look at it, the bottom line is that what is the impact on the ordinary Ghanaian, like Honorable is saying. But I think our experience tells us, and that also explains the apprehension that a lot of people have whenever the country is subjecting itself to an IMF program, because we know the implications. But with this time round, they're a bit sensitive because the fund has been unpopular over the years. If you cast your mind back to the 80s, I mean, at some point they had to introduce policies to mitigate the negative impact of the adjustment and all that. And so that is it. One thing that stands out for me for this program is also the mandate for the central bank to be independent. I know that, I mean, before moving into our inflation targeting regime, central bank independence is critical for inflation targeting. But it so happens that over the period, we tend to find government interfering in the activities of the central bank. Under the COVID, we know that those were extenuating circumstances, so the bank had to come in to finance some of the bonds and maturing debts because there were no access to funds. But I think that for me, lessons need to be learned so that as a country, we make institutions work, we do the right things, and persistently try to remove the political interference and the indiscipline that creeps in over the period. And also, I mean, learn lessons to cut our coats within our cloth so that we do not persistently rely on borrowing to finance our way through development, particularly through recurrent expenditure, because essentially when you look at it, a lot of the debt has not gone into capital expenditure.
I'm going to take a quick break. When I return, Dr. Mohammed Amin Adam, please stay with me. Dr. Tui Champon also. I'll get your quick reaction to the energy conversation as Mr. Jinapo began, because I see in the document that you've agreed to embark on an ambitious reform agenda in the energy sector, which is expected to limit the growing fiscal costs. And what does that look like? Also, the expenditure savings, you're also committing to create the needed fiscal space, and that will stem from efficiency gains and the reduction of large subsidy bill in the energy sector. I was under the impression that the subsidy conversation was long dead, but apparently isn't. So we'll try and get that clarity. And then briefly, the document talks about, and Tio Champon touched on it, if Dr. Aminadam can explain that when we return, that government has committed to adopt the new fiscal regime for the extractive sector. It presupposes that fiscal regime possibly has been drafted already and needs adopting. What does that look like? And then finally, so really, what's the cushion in the program? What are the safety nets that have been put in there? Because we've talked extensively about the challenges and the cost to everybody, but what are the safety nets? What's the cushion in the program to help all of us make it slightly easier to carry the burden? Please stay with us after this. And thank you for staying with us here on Newsfile. And Newsfile is brought to you by Bank of Africa, as strong as a group, as close as a partner. MTN everywhere you go. Ashasi University, educating ethical and entrepreneurial leaders for Africa. Roberts & Sons Optical Services, your comprehensive eye care service provider for 31 years. My Way Insurance, dial *165# on the MTN to join. Duraplast, how you get your water matters. Remember, where Duraplast goes, water flows. And then DBS Industries, roofing, few. And some of you, many of you have joined us with your comments. Jack Reacher and says, one of my favorite movie characters, says, are we going to get new taxes? A simple yes or no question has turned into a rant. Alidas says it needs to be more clear. Don Rich says, yeah, a bailout is definitely going to cause us some fiscal and monetary headache for years to come. MK Mate, why can't we be comparing ourselves to the African nations that are doing far better than Ghana without IMF bailout, but we rather sit to compare ourselves to the ones that we are ahead of with this? How can we say we are thinking of development as a country? Sap Kobe says, unless our leaders stop accumulating wealth for themselves, we will never stop running to the IMF. Kwabena says, please ask the minister when the finance minister is honoring the matured principles due since February 2023 for pensioner and individual bond holders. A few of your messages there, and you are so live here on Newsnight. My guest with me in the last 1 hour 30 minutes have been, as you may have been hearing, Dr. Mohamed Amin Adam, Minister of State at the Finance Ministry, Dr. Priscilla Chumisi Bafo, economist and senior lecturer at the Department of Economics and at the University of Ghana, Legon, Dr. Tio Champon, who is an economist and political risk analyst, and John Abdullahi Jinapo, who is a member of Parliament for Yape Kusugu constituency, member of the Finance, Mines and Energy Committee of Parliament. And to that, I want to turn next, because one of the biggest challenges we face, the reason why our deficit is so huge and we keep borrowing in debt, is the energy sector. The energy sector is a significant player in our crisis, and this document addresses a bit of that. And the document actually says that the government had committed itself to embark on, quote, an ambitious reform agenda in the energy sector, which is expected to limit its growing fiscal costs. Dr. Mohamed Amin Adam, what does this look like, this ambitious reform in the energy sector? What would it look like?
Well, Ivan, there are structural reforms that we have to implement under the program. And some of these reforms, we started doing them, but not as ambitious as we are going to look at. But let me just add to a very important point that was made earlier about the unemployment by the World Bank report. I haven't seen the report, I would like to see to understand the contours of the analysis in that report. Then also, my brother Singapore is talking about bad conditions that the fund program is going to bring to the economy. Talking about food prices are going to go up, and we made reference to food inflation in the past. The reality is that we all know why food prices went up. We know why petroleum prices went up. So sometimes when our friends on the other side talk, it's as if they are in the same. But we all know the circumstances. There are external factors that affected all of us, not just in Ghana, across the world. He kept saying that petroleum prices will increase. In the contrary, petroleum prices are decreasing. And that is a statement of fact. I can understand when people talk about credibility, that election is coming next year, and therefore, what is the commitment of the government to achieve the targets that we set for ourselves? I can understand that because in the last election, under the last IMF program, we suffered credibility deficit, and that was the program from 2015. By 2016, they had not met any of the targets. Not a single target was met by the then government. And so I am even surprised, for about credibility when we all know that they are the grandfathers of credibility deficit. We had to come in and then work with the IMF to achieve the target, the intended targets under the last program. But I can assure you that we are committed at the highest level. His Excellency the President is committed. Those of us at the Ministry of Finance under our leader, the Honorable Ken Oporata, we are committed to following through. Dr. Teo also talked about the fiscal consolidation, which I think is a very important component of this program. Increasing revenue, tax revenue, as a percentage of GDP from 15% by end 2022 to 18% will require huge effort. Fortunately for us, the 5.1 percentage adjustment, fiscal adjustment, which in total we are supposed to do under the program, about 3.1 percentage points of that have already been passed in the 2023 budget. We factored that into the 2023 budget, and all the revenue and expenditure measures to deliver the 3.1% have already been passed by Parliament. And so we are committed to this, and we will do this together with the people of Ghana cooperating and supporting us. Now, to the energy sector question. As I said, there are a number of structural reforms that we have to implement. The energy sector is key. Pricing is an issue, and we already have discussed automatic tariff adjustment and also fuel pricing index to macro indicators like inflation and exchange rate, so that we do not accumulate arrears. Under the program, we are not required to accumulate new arrears. Okay. And so we will have to make sure that we are able to restructure the debt so that we can be able to clear the arrears, because the fund program also requires us to develop an arrears clearance plan. So we need to be able to come up with this plan to enable us to clear the arrears that are accumulated, the legacy debts that have been accumulated in the energy sector, but also to keep current on future invoices that are coming. And this we are able to do when we have a cost recovery pricing. In the energy sector also, we want to improve on the efficiency of the agencies, particularly ECG, in the collection of their bills. We know that they have embarked on an ambitious operation. They are collecting their debts. They've collected 3.1 billion cedis. We think that this should be sustained. It should not just be a 9-day wonder. It should be sustained, and we are determined to support ECG in particular to reform their collection system, to digitalize their collection system, and to be able to reach out everywhere to improve on their collection. It's not just about ECG, but also other agencies within the energy sector need to be made more efficient so that they do not accumulate debt, and they also can operate to reduce the losses, technical losses and commercial losses, so we do not accumulate new arrears. It is also important to state that we have to restructure some of the power purchase agreements that we signed with our partners, the IPPs. The reality is that in the past, particularly under the NDC government, they signed contracts that committed us to take or pay provisions, which meant that we'll have to pay for energy use or not use once they declare availability. And this has also been one of the reasons we've accumulated arrears. And so we are reforming the sector to ensure that we pay for only energy. We don't want to pay for capacity, not to even talk about excess capacity. We want to pay for energy. We want to be able to pay them in local currency. So we want to embark on this reform that will ensure that the energy sector is robust, that will ensure also that reliability of supply of power is assured, and then that will ensure that the sector generates its own revenue. Energy is a commercial commodity, and this is why there's no reason that the government should use the budget money, which is meant for health infrastructure, educational infrastructure, to pay IPPs. It is a commercial commodity. We should be able to generate the revenue that can pay its cost. But whilst doing this, we are also sensitive to the plight of the poor. And so we will continue to support the lifeline tariff mechanism that we have in the tariff. We even want to redefine the lifeline tariff in order to ensure that it serves its purpose. That's one of the reforms that we want to pursue in the energy sector.
Okay, thank you very much. And so that's a bit of the cushion also. Dr. Tui Champon, how deep should the energy sector reforms be?
It has to be very deep. Luckily, in the document, the IMF has actually tasked the government to submit an updated energy sector recovery plan by the end of next month. So that's June. And within that document, Honorable has talked about some of them, but they're like 5 key things. We've talked about the first one, which is the tariff adjustments. Again, we've talked about the renegotiation of the power purchase agreement. But the key thing is to reduce the take-or-pay liability. So I was a little bit surprised when the new contracts that we signed and extended, they still had some of those clauses and obligations within that. That sort of flies in the face of what this commitment under the IMF program seeks to do. The third thing is really to improve the operational performance of the SOEs in the energy sector. So Honorable talks about ECG particularly. But I think if you extend that conversation to all of our state-owned enterprises, many of them are leaking money and hemorrhaging, substantive amounts of money. In the document, the IMF report, there's a table in there that they show the example of Cocoa Board with its profit and loss. And you will be shocked, if you go back since 2015, thereabouts, there's not been a single year that it's actually had a net, profit. It's significantly, consistently since 2016 been operating with a net loss. That is not, sustainable for Cocoa Board or indeed for many of our state-owned enterprises that have serious issues with, financial viability. The third and fourth on the energy sector is really about subsidies that need to be reformed, and then things to do with distribution losses as well. But there's one fundamental thing that we probably haven't discussed, or maybe we'll come to, which is that in this document, and probably the first time that I have seen in any IMF document, they're talking about serious governance reforms. In paragraph 43, page 22 of the document, it says that, and I quote here, the performance in government effectiveness, regulatory quality, and control of corruption have deteriorated over the last 10 years in Ghana. This is in the document. And a lot of the issues that we're discussing here, part of it is, the root cause has to do with really how government runs the state machinery, and to an extent how it manifests in terms of checking corruption. And within that, there are a number of some proposed solutions, but I think a few ones are really interesting, and we can come to that to discuss. But 2 quick ones that I will kind of highlight there is a new act or law that is meant to be passed called the Conduct of Public Officers Act. And this is meant to address some weaknesses in the existing asset declaration regime. And then at the GRA itself, they're supposed to have a reinforcement of the internal governance framework. So this will include things like internal audit, risk management, and internal affairs. And then our infamous or famous Auditor General's report and its recommendations. Here there are some proposals there on even passing some guidelines for emergency expenditure, management. What was missing on the governance side is really what we do with campaign financing, which is one of the elephants in the room. But you could argue that that is really outside of the remit of the IMF. But it's really fundamental. But I was glad to see some, attempts on the governance side to introduce reforms that would, in a way, limit the behavior of some of our, political appointees.
I mean, Dr. Chumesi, that is an interesting addition this time. They are not only checking your finances and making sure your economy, but now they are actually going to the root cause, I guess, is the behavior of government officials and government agencies now wielding again to say you have to improve internal governance and the way you do your things, including asset declaration. I don't know what you make of that.
I think it's a call in the right direction, but I'm a bit skeptical about the progress that can be made within 3 years that the country would be under the program. But essentially, when you look at over the period, all our IMF programs, we tend to focus so much on the funds that we get.
Exactly.
And then when you look at policy prescriptions that enable us to transform our economy, build on systems and structures so that we can address the inherent vulnerabilities in the economy, you tend not to see a lot of these. So I'll give you a typical example. Under the 2015 ECF program, I think that is when we instituted the Fiscal Responsibility Act and all that. And then COVID came, and under force majeure, we had to put that aside and get back on. I think the document is also getting us get back to the fiscal responsibility at levels of any government not running a deficit over 5% of GDP. I think these are systems that we need to ensure. And for me, my passion is basically on the economic side, because issues like governance and things, sometimes the outcomes are difficult to measure. And so, in essence, we should be more committed to addressing the inherent issues. Like Theo said, if you've been given paracetamol or whatever to control the temperature, we need to get to the root cause of what is causing the rise in temperature. And those are the structural issues. Addressing the medium-term fundamental problems of exchange rate issues, inflation, and all that.
And the Bank of Ghana governor said something at a press conference, and I guess because you brought it, I need to put it to you. He says that don't focus on the money. Use this as an opportunity to reset the economy. And he started talking about the key things.
Exactly. Use this opportunity to reset the economy. Reset the economy.
What does it look like? Exactly. Then he mentions, the structural fundamentals, so export-led instead of importing. But we've been talking about that for decades now.
So the issue is that it's not like we don't know what to do in this country. We know what to do. But basically, it boils down mostly to the lack of political will most of the times. And the fact that essentially these structural reforms require a lot more time than a political cycle. So you see, the challenge we face is that we tend to try to want quick fixes, short-term results, to show that the government has done something. I can understand the position politicians are in because they are looking at the next election. But I think that we should get beyond that and look at the bigger picture with structural changes, investing in the right areas in the economy. So, for example, I was asking John, what is it with the energy sector that all politicians speak so passionately about for us to change. But it appears the problems still persist. There is nothing that appears to be done about it. If we are able to solve these issues of energy, issues of access to credit, issues of skilled labor, then we will be equipping firms to be productive and produce domestically, reduce our import dependence, export. It is not rocket science, but it takes a lot more commitment and effort on the part of government to deliver on these. And most of the times, it appears they tend to be dealing with short-term, 4-year political cycle, maximum 8 years, and so it becomes a bit murky.
John, as we wrap up, I need to ask you, government cannot implement this program without the support of the minority. I bet some of it will have to come to Parliament for consideration. Do they have your support?
As far as practicable, we are all Ghanaians. We want the betterment of the economy. But we must do so with some candor. We must do so with some level of transparency, honesty, and forthright. The minister just told you, and Tio confirmed it. Though the NDC signed excess take or pay clauses, and as for them, they do not. This is the contract here, and I refer to page 5. Capital recovery shall mean the amount calculated in accordance with clause 5.1 of this PPA. And if you go to clause 5.1, it tells you the capital recovery. The capital recovery is simply that I declare availability, you are not ready to take it. I've taken a loan from the banks to bring the plant here. So you must give me something to go and pay the banks, because you got me to bring the plant here. In the energy sector, it's capital intensive, there's a long duration, and you cannot sell it like ordinary goods. So if you get me to bring my plant here, and you do not off-take it, and you say, look, I'm not ready to take it, I must go and service that debt. And so this idea that as for the NPP government, they are signing take and pay clauses is not true. This is the document signed under the NPP administration. The Tama LNG project signed under the NPP administration is a take or pay agreement. So first, when you do this, then you break the trust amongst ourselves. Let's agree that maybe there's some element of capital recovery. What level can we go? How can we deal with it? Maybe during the NDC time, there were some challenges. How can we address it? Today, there are challenges. How can we address it? For instance, losses have moved up from 20% when I was leaving to 31%. What accounts for that? What it means is that of every 100 CD power that you sell, ECG is able to collect only 70. So even if there were no exchange rate losses, ab initio, you have a bigger problem. Then the depreciation of the CD is exacerbated the situation. Based on my calculation and what ECG provides, it's about $300 million per annum. How do you deal with that? And then the inefficiencies that we are all talking about, the fuel issues. How do we deal with those issues? But when you create this impression as if somebody was worse and that you've come and yours is so good, everything is so, and the document here, signed by under your administration, confirms that that is not the case, then wouldn't make a headway. Then we begin to blame ourselves and deal with, and then the policy issues. So something like 1D, 1F, it is targeted at something. Import substitution. So 6 years after that implementation, you must then turn back and ask yourself, do a critical evaluation and say, what are the results? Are we really reducing imports? When I was listening to the Minister of Finance, was it yesterday or the day before? He said, oh, this IMF program will help us to ensure that we reduce imports like tomatoes. And I'm saying, wow. 6 years after planting for food and jobs, we are now talking of an IMF program that is really restricting investment, that is really coming up with very tight fiscal measures to do some of the things that we said we were doing 6 years ago. Look, I went to my village, one village, one dam. It was supposed to ensure that there is all year-round farming. How was this structured? What can we learn from the failures of some of these things so that we don't throw money at some of these programs only to achieve virtually nothing? So that if we say that, look, we can just build 4 dams, proper dams, located at some centers, and also put some 4 or 5 factories around that area, so that there's ready market for tomato farmers to take their tomatoes there, process or semi-process. Then we can make some impact analysis. But like Madam said, it's like all of us, we want the MPP to go out, so we want power. We criticize them. They also have only 4 years. So they throw all kinds of policies. NAPCO was supposed to solve youth unemployment problems. After 4 or 5 years, it's collapsed. So I think that beyond this IMF program, we should also do an introspection and look at some of the policies we implement. If you go to borrow money from somebody in London, do you come to invest it in recurrent expenditure? Or you come to use it for something that will generate income? These are the areas
but fundamentally, they have your support in Parliament.
As far as practicable,
Okay.
we'll support them.
Okay.
And so the last one, it has to do even with the extractive industry.
Yes, yes.
I know Dr. Teo is very passionate about it. You see, when they were bringing those deals to Parliament, like the Aker deal, the ExxonMobil, we told them, be careful with these stability agreements. Now you've gotten Parliament to approve those stability agreements. That says that irrespective of your macroeconomic condition, you cannot vary those agreements. And you are still telling the IMF that you go and vary the agreements. Can you, just by policy, vary these agreements when you've brought those agreements to Parliament and Parliament has approved them? If you vary them and they go to court of arbitration, what will happen? These are issues that I think we should be looking at going forward. But I agree largely to some of the things Dr. Teo talked about. Governance, ensuring accountability, ensuring transparency. They all help.
I mean, Dr. Amin Adam, let me give you the final word. And whilst you take that, give us an update on where you are with that, condition of restructuring your external debt. I mean, this deal you've received is predicated on you closing that particular gap, as Zambia had, struggled with his, even after the executive board approval. What is Ghana's strategy to avoid the Zambia fate, where they got a deal, but they've been stuck for a while now because it's been difficult to restructure the external debt? Where are we with getting that closed?
Well, Honorable Juniper talked about losses in the sector being 20% when they left government. That is not true. Losses have never been less than 30%. That is not a fact. So you may have to check your data. We have renegotiated some of your take or pay contracts into take and pay contracts. We have renegotiated AXA contracts. We've agreed for us to pay only for energy. And we've renegotiated the Senate contract. We've agreed for us to pay for only energy. So they are now take and pay contracts that are visible examples of how we have renegotiated contracts that you sign from take or pay to take and pay. In terms of the stability agreement, you signed 13 petroleum agreements, and each of these agreements has stability clauses in those agreements. So you cannot turn around and say that we signed the ExxonMobil and the Aker stability agreement. You signed 13 petroleum agreements, each of them. There's no single petroleum agreement you did not negotiate stability agreements in them. Now coming to the question of the restructuring of the debt.
Yeah, externally.
We got the financial assurances from the official bilateral creditors on the 12th of May. And that is strong indication that we will move also faster in the negotiation relative to Zambia. It took us 5 months to get the financing assurance from the time we applied for it in December. And so that is not the same as Zambia. Zambia took 17 months to get the financing assurance. Sri Lanka took 7 months to get the financing assurance. So it will not be the same as the case of Zambia. We are very confident that when the negotiations start, it will start in earnest, and the level of cooperation and understanding we already have received from the bilateral creditors shows that we will move faster. As far as the commercial creditors are concerned, the confidence in Ghana's economy has been boosted already just by the announcement of the IMF. Ghana's international bond yields are going in the right direction. Our international bond, 8 of our international bonds are among the top 10 best performing bonds in emerging markets. And we have seen our yield increasing by about 12%. compared with 3.6% among emerging markets. So the confidence level is already being boosted. That should provide a favorable condition for the negotiation with our commercial creditors. And then I am very confident that they will support us, they will cooperate with us, and together we can put our debt to sustainable levels as the basis for accelerated economic takeoff.
And I need to ask this finally. I mean, there's going to be definitely pain ahead. But where is the cushion? I mean, in this document and agreement with the IMF, if you can bullet for me, how is government cushioning the ordinary Ghanaian with what we now expect to be some tough times still ahead?
Well, Ivan, I said earlier that we have negotiated a very strong, social intervention investment in the project, in the program, and some of the socially sensitive programs we have been implementing are going to be supported. LEAP, for example, is going to be doubled and has been doubled in the 2023 budget already. The capitation grant is going to double. School feeding program is going to double as well. In fact, free senior high school program has not been interrupted. We're going to make it more efficient. The National Health Insurance Scheme. To the extent that in this program, we've negotiated spending floors. And when I talk about spending floor, the minimum that we can spend on social intervention. By June, we should be spending 2 billion cedis, on social intervention. And by September this year, we should be spending 3 billion cedis. By December, we should be spending a cumulative 4 billion cedis. This is different from our normal spending in the sense that sometimes you budget and the releases are not corresponding well with the budget. But now we have negotiated some minimum ceding, which means we can even go beyond that. But these are guaranteed spending that we have to do to ensure that the poor in our society are not affected. And these are the very programs that directly affect the poor. And so we see this program to be different from previous IMF programs because this government is sensitive to the plight of the poor people. And we will make sure that we continue to cushion them and carry them along so that we all can own the solution that will take us to the level of economic recovery we desire for our country.
Dr. Mohamed Amin, thank you very much for joining us. And that's it for this part of the conversation. We're going to take a break. When we return, we're going to be doing a switch to the National Democratic Congress. You remember last week by this time, they had started their parliamentary and presidential primaries. It produced an outcome. John Dramani Mahama is the party's flag bearer. But well, more than 15 incumbent MPs also lost their, primaries, which means they cannot stand again in next year's elections. There being some controversy about, executive interference in some of the constituencies. The party now needs to begin the process of, closing ranks, trying to mend the cracks, and then focus on the 2024 election. So you need to ask the question: this outcome, does it put the NDC in a position where they can say that they are really ready for next year? And what has been the implication of the outcome to their chances and fortunes next year? Stay with us for that. And remember, the Newsfile is always brought to you by Bank of Africa, as strong as a group, as close as a partner. MTN, everywhere you go. Ashasa University, educating ethical and entrepreneurial leaders for Africa. Robert & Sons Optical Service, your comprehensive eye care service provider, for 31 years. My Way Insurance, dial *165# on the MTN to join. Duraplus, how you get your water matters. Remember, where Duraplus goes, water flows. DBS Industries Roofing, Papa Pie. Stay with us.
Leadership that we have is bold and positioned enough to confront indiscipline. Going to report internal grievances in the media is just as good as taking the party to court, or is just as good as betraying the party. And so members who are aggrieved by a decision and the spirit of discipline understand that those grievances ought to be channeled through internal processes. I've heard them call for leadership must hear everyone up. Leadership must discipline. If I'm supposed to be disciplining anybody, I'll first of all discipline an elected member who will run to the media to run to further degenerate or deepen cracks.
You see, there are a lot of people that have dipped their fingers and nose into conferences. His Excellency must hear people's verdict. It's not about politics. And I'm with all humility and with a lot of respect to my colleagues that unless I have contested several elections, this will be my fate. People don't forgive. Because when you do that, people don't easily forgive. They may keep quiet, but they are looking for an opportunity to strike. Because they believe that, look, even in this times of difficulty, this is what some people have done. What if we get power? They may be doing worse because that time they may even have been supported with political authority. So to tell those members that this your fear is genuine and I'm going to allay it, this person will take a back seat and not be allowed to take a front seat.
You have this man sitting in the in the Council of State, serving under the MPP, and sitting in your Council of Elders meeting. Then you turn around and tell people that people are leaking information. Why can't we call a spade and say this person is no longer with our party? We are distancing ourselves from you. Until we call a spade in our party and say, look, yes, you are a senior, we thank you for your service, but if you can no longer toe the line of the party, no individual is bigger than the party. But a party that lacks the balls and the guts to discipline errant elders cannot rein in exuberant young people. And so you will begin to have pockets of people beginning to take the law into their own hands. You want to fix this party? Instill discipline.
Anybody who loses an election and feels that the process was not fair, it was not balanced, and that things were done in a manner to undermine his or her chances, has a difficulty lending themselves to any reconciliatory process. When you are put in there as a national officer, you must act in ways that advance the interests of the party. It is not unusual in politics to have a situation where, based on one or two considerations, the party believes that this candidate is preferable to that candidate. In instances like that, what you use is dialogue and a consultative process to impress upon a person who will be adversely affected as to why it is necessary to make that sacrifice. But if you do not do that, and you attempt to sidestep the process or skew the process in a manner that makes it unfair, then you are going to have some of these difficulties. I had a challenge with a national organizer, and it resulted in some controversy. I'm sure you read it. Yeah. I do not want to go into that. Yeah. But what business did a national organizer have interfering in a constituency election like that?
That's true. The key point in this determination is that the serial numbers on the ballots in question are from the booklet used in the constituency election. And since there is no overvoting, these ballots cannot be said to be foreign materials. This means, as far as our internal elections are concerned, stamping of ballot papers are irrelevant, given no overvoting and the correspondence of serial numbers to the booklet. If these ballots were removed during sorting, will we be here? Or the fact that they were taken out after recount and not even after EC declaration make them valid? Can our members accept this if it occurs to us in the national elections? This really worries me. This concern notwithstanding, I remain positive about the course of the party for victory 2024.
And that's Edem Agbana's constituency, where there was some controversy there, but there was a few bit of controversy as well. As you heard in that clip, there are many of the winning candidates themselves were not happy. So you can begin to imagine what will be going through the minds and hearts of those who lost. More than 15 of them who fell in this primary. And in the studio with me is a man who many will say was very lucky because he was unopposed in the Yape-Kosogo constituency. True that, you count yourself extremely lucky that you had nobody contesting you.
Yes, thank you. This is my second time running without having a contest. The first one I had a contest, two very strong people. I think the margin showed that maybe they ought to give me that breather Also, it's about your relationship with your constituents, and more importantly, the kingmakers who are the delegates. I'm sure that people would have gauged the constituency.
You don't want to go and waste your time.
If I go to pick the form, would I really make any inroads? And so let me thank my polling station executives, the constituency chairman. In some constituencies, normally the MP has a problem with either the chairman, the secretary, or 2 or 3 other people. Fortunately for me, we appear to be working in tandem. We have a very cordial working relationship. It's usually an NDC stronghold, even though at a particular year we won with only 104 or so votes. We've been able to move it to about 9,000 thereabout and held it around. In 2016, it was about 9,000. In 2020, it was about 8,900. So we've really done quite well. It is our hope that as we prepare for the party to assume power in 2025, the margin would even increase more. It's not going to be that easy, given that normally when you stay for 1 or 2 terms, expectations, and in a typical rural setting, everybody sees the MP as their source of whatever they need. And even when you try to explain that, look, sometimes you really need to stretch, some people would not understand. And so it's normal. When you are in power, it's a bit more easier. You may be lucky to have an appointment, and so your level of influence is much, much bigger. But let's see how it goes. And I was expecting that the 2 candidates who were contesting against His Excellency John Mahama would have done some self-introspection. I mean, any objective person, I mean, beyond the politics, would tell that, look, it was going to be very difficult to beat President Mahama in the primaries. He towers above them. Except that the results tells me that the party is really focused. They know what they want. It's clear if you look at the presidential results, almost 99%. I was part of the team. So the previous one, I was part of the team. We had about 95%. And so Professor Joshua Labi's target was that we should not go below the 95% target. And so we set ourselves to ensure that we achieve a minimum of 95. Later did we know that we could do up to close to about 99%. And so this is a time to close the ranks. President Mahama has indicated that Kojo Bonsu has called him. I think it's also indicated that Dr. Duflo has placed a call to him. So there's real unity. And for such a big party, one shouldn't be surprised that there are 1 or 2 complaints. I mean, for 275 constituencies with a level of competition, you would surely expect that 1 or 2 people will not be happy. I've heard Sam George, I've heard Felix Ofosu-Kwakye, I've heard, I think...
Muntaka Mubarak, you know.
Yeah, these are concerns that I think the party should take on board. Because whether you like it or not, they are your candidates. Whether you like it or not, some of them are your MPs. We must necessarily work together and ensure that we bring the party.
Let me ask you your take on the more than 15 of your colleagues who lost the primaries, including your good friend Bawa, who sits on the Committee of Mines Energy with you. He's lost his bongo. I mean, have you called them to commiserate, and how is that going to affect the work going forward? I mean, you have still a lot to still do in Parliament. Would they still have the energy?
Absolutely. I've lost about 4 members on my committee as ranking member.
In this last primary?
Yeah. I've lost Dr. Donko, I've lost Bawa, I've lost Delasoa, I've lost Jogi Disu. No, that's quite a huge hemorrhage. 4 people, and my committee is one of the strongest committees when it comes to the NDC side. You have Dr. Donko there, you have myself, you have Bawa, you have Kofi Amabua, you have Naza Toure. You have some very, very tough, intelligent guys within the energy sector. And so it's a big blow. But sometimes it even pushes them to work harder. I recall when Ras Mubarak lost, people thought that he was going to relax, but he gave of his best. And so it's not always the case. It's about how we handle it. I'm sure that the flag bearer would meet, first of all, the losing candidates. Eventually, I'm sure he'll meet all of us as MPs, and I'm sure he will also meet all the NDC candidates. And so I don't think that we've lost so much. It's unfortunate. I really thought that those members on my committee were doing a very, very good job. Very sharp, intelligent, articulate guys. It's unfortunate. Sometimes I've said that you are better off losing the primaries than losing the general election.
Yeah, well.
Or it comes, at least once you lose the primaries, you can prepare and know that, look, you are living, so you prepare. But I hope that our numbers increase in Parliament, and
that's in the main elections.
Yeah,
stay with me, John. Let me bring in Richard Ahiagba. He's a director of communications for the New Patriotic Party, and he joins us right now via Zoom. We still have Dr. Tui Champon, who is an economist, but also relevant for this conversation. He's a political risk analyst. I want to tap into his expertise a bit, into what the outcome what the outcome means for the NDC going into next year's election. But Richard, let me come to you. Now, your main opposition, your main contender in the elections next year, the NDC, they've completed their reorganization now. They have a new flag bearer. They know who their candidates are, but, barring a few constituencies still yet to be done. I mean, they are ready, I guess, for you next year. You, however, have a long road with, several primaries down the line. That leaves you at least a year behind the NDC if you do the calculations. Is that some cause for concern for the MPP? Sorry, Richard, if you may unmute for me. Can you hear you?
Yes, sorry.
Great. I can hear you now.
Yeah, thank you, Evans. Greetings to my brother JJ and Dr. Thea Champo, and to your listeners and viewers across the country. Okay, so it is not a concern for us necessarily because we are starting our own processes. I think the 26th of this month, the presidential primaries will commence. And hopefully, if there are no more than 5 candidates picking the forms, then we'll transition through to the elections and without the special delegate conference. So our processes will unfold as we have designed them, and it's just a matter of time. And so really, there isn't any pressure from the NDC, but to say that they have terminated their processes, and so now they move to the next stage of prepping and organizing for the election next year. So I think it's just a process they have finished, and we're starting ours. It doesn't really present any pressure, but if anything at all, it gives us some markings on the road to observe and see the things that we can avoid. Some of the concerns that were raised in the videos that you played earlier, we can watch and try to educate ourselves to avoid those flashpoints and make sure that our election, as always expected of the MPP, is as peaceful, as transparent as should be, and that we can carry through with it without any major internal effects in terms of people feeling slighted by any part of the electoral process. So there isn't any real pressure in terms of us feeling like, well, they have elected their officers or completed the process, as it were. But for us to be able to model ours to be an exemplary process that can help enrich our democracy. So we're quite happy for them. And the challenges that they're talking about, I think that for the NDC standards, they've done very well. And in fact, one thing that we need to commend them for is the fact that they were able to organize both the parliamentary and presidential elections all on one day, given their particular situation. Not that we couldn't do it, but given the specific circumstances we have, we are not doing it that way. But I think it's something of an organizational fit that we can commend them for. And then just hope that they are able to deal with the internal spillovers, which are some of them very serious. If you look at the situation with the Dr. Dufour, that's a major happening, right? For the first time, an internal election taken to court in a manner at the presidential level has been taken to court, but for Dr. Dufour's own grace to withdraw from the race, and if he had persisted with a case in court, nobody knows how it would have ended Would it be that the NDC wouldn't have had the primaries last Saturday, and that would have set them back and probably put a monkey wrench in their planning for 2024. So I think that they've been saved, and the outcome largely, now we can talk about it because there's no major rift in there. The situation you referred to in Ketu North, for example, is also something that when you think about it, it may just be some pressure point that was pressed for some individuals to align, and therefore people fell in line. I've had reports from the ground that suggest that the consensus reached is not exactly how we should have gone, to say that Adam won. People are still contending it and suggesting that perhaps the guy ceded his position for the good of the party. And so they have some real problems to resolve in-house, but we wish them well. What happens now, Evans, before you ask the question?
Sure.
The Ghana awaits the New Patriotic Party to select the next president of this republic, and that will be done in November this year.
Okay, you go straight to electing not a candidate, but the next president.
No, we will select the next president.
Okay, you select the next president. Okay, I'll come back to you, John. But let me get to a Champons quick. Right, Tio, how are you reading the outcome?
No, I was just laughing at Richard's last comment.
Exactly.
Quite interesting to hear that. But I think, on the NDC side, it was quite obvious who would win the presidential, primaries. And then also the different parliamentary candidates, for the party. There was an expectation that some of them would lose their seats, and these things are normally driven by internal grassroots dynamics, than what's happening at an external level. But I think that is behind them now, and from some of the statements that I'm seeing, it looks as though there's a clarion call for party unity in that regard to execute their campaign agenda going forward, because we've got a very interesting year ahead of us with all of the stuff that is happening with the economy, the IMF, and those discussions that we're having. I mean, basically, on the side of the incumbent government of the MPP, they've gone to probably the first quarter of next year to turn this economy around. And going into next year, the competition would be really about what I call them the two P's, right? It's going to be on policy and it's going to be on personality. And in that regard, John Mahama and whoever is elected on the NPP side and the other people around him, all of the conversation would really be driven around these two policy, personality type, debate. So one key thing or indicator personally I'm actually looking out for in terms of how this possibly would pan out is the by-election that we're going to have this Tuesday in Kumu.
Yeah.
Yes, very, very interesting by-election. If you look at the margins from 2016 and 2020, 2016, the late MP had a substantive margin. In 2020, that had dwindled a little bit, I think, to about just under 15,000. And there was an independent candidate that got about 12 or so thousand. I don't have the specific numbers, but it's largely within that ballpark. And off the back of all of that, which is happening with inflation and the economy and all those challenges, it remains to be seen the extent of the margin, if any, that the MPP, because they retain that seat, right, if any, may get, or there might even be a flip over if that were to happen. But that would be very telling of what the feelings of Ghanaians are at the grassroots with all of the stuff that is going on. And then when you superimpose on top this debate about, who is best positioned to fix the economic crisis or the mess that we find ourselves in, I think we're really in for a very, very interesting campaign going into 2024. The MPP did campaign in 2016 on the track record that they are quote-unquote competent economic managers, right? Things happened. A lot has changed. But even in the IMF document we were just discussing, the IMF said that there were pre-existing, fiscal and debt vulnerabilities, which were compounded by the pandemic. So you've got a lot happening on both parties and who they choose. But on the NDC side, they know who they've gotten, and it's then a question of to what extent, if any, do Ghanaians perceive John Mahama as a credible candidate to give them their the vote.
Yeah, I mean, and Theo, if you may, because that last point you made there, I want to put it to John, because it's a fundamental point. I mean, John Mahama, Junapo gets 98% plus, almost 99% in the delegates' elections. But as Theo says, that victory will mean absolutely nothing if the general public in the next year's elections reject him, right? So the question that he asked, I want to put to you: to what extent can he position himself as the most credible person next year to win the elections? Because for the very first time in our political history, you're having a candidate, not two candidates, I think John Mahama included, who have all been, we have a former president who is now standing for re-election after the expiration of another term. It's never happened before. So that unknown, nobody really knows how it's going to play out, right? So that question needs to be answered. I wonder if the NDC have done that analysis of, is John Mahama, yes, delegates give him, but considering that 1 year he did before, and this is the first time we are seeing another, this sort of dynamic, how credible is he?
Very, very credible. There's no doubt about that. The truth is that in 2016, it was a very tough year. Don't forget, the MPP had been in opposition for 8 years. President Mahama took over with a very difficult situation. Commodity prices had tumbled. The situation was tough. We had even gone for an IMF program, and the MPP used the IMF program big time against President Mahama. In fact, going to an IMF program was synonymous to incompetence. To cut a long story short, he lost by about 1 million. 2020, he stood against President Akufo-Addo. President Akufo-Addo used this same IMF program against President Mahama. Anytime you criticize the MPP, the response was that, though you took us to IMF. Though you took us to IMF. It was very, very normal for them to say that. Irrespective of that, he clawed back about 600,000 votes. And so he really pushed, and then our parliamentary minority, which was very, very slim, I think about 9p something, we brought it to about 137. But for the problem we are having with the
Security?
Yes, because he won. I mean, as for the votes, he won. It's just legal issues with respect to his nationality that is denying him. Other than that, we put up a very good show for the 2020 elections. We even went to court and insisted that some of the issues were not properly dealt with, but the court is ruled. So now, fast forward, we're going to 2024. The dynamics are changing. People are now beginning to see the true MPP in terms of their economic record. Dr. Bawumia, for instance, was presented as an economic wizard, and that irrespective of the challenge, he had a magic wand to deal with the situation. Now we are realizing that that is not the situation after all. For the first time in the history of this country, as I said, under the fourth Republican dispensation, we are defaulting on all these payments. Even under President Mahama's IMF, we never defaulted, and we never had this kind of challenges we are seeing. This level of inflation, we never had it. So it's a situation that we are all assessing. I'm sure the MPP is also assessing it. We are also assessing it. We have to find a way of presenting our candidate, like you said, as a credible candidate, telling Ghanaians the challenges, telling Ghanaians what he did in terms of infrastructure, in terms of health sector, the energy sector, and all that. And some of us have to lead that charge. Some of us have to lead that debate and tell the people of Ghana why they need one, President Mahama, and why they need the NDC. And I think that it wouldn't be as difficult as one would have had the situation.
Because the MPP has helped your case.
In 2020. Not just that, naturally, when you stay in power for a while, even as an MP, there's some level of attrition, naturally. And also, the MPP came up with very, very promising slogans. I mean, employment, NAPCO was a key issue. Even in 2020, the campaign was that if you vote for President Mahama, he will cancel NAPCO. Now we've seen that NAPCO is not sustainable. So the dynamics are changing. And so I do not always want to rush to draw conclusions. But I'm convinced that President Mahama has a very, very, very good chance of winning and becoming president. I mean, the ground is very fertile for him. And more importantly, you also need the party's unity.
Yeah, I'll come to that. Stay with me, because that is a substantive point we need to look at the back of the primary. But Richard, the dynamics are changing, he says. That the last 8 years, he says, you've shown your true nature and you've held their cause because of where the economy is. And that makes John Mahama, who was significantly damaged after 2016, significantly reformed and able now to put up a challenge. On the face of the pink sheet, as we've been saying now, that's true, is it not? That where the economy is today and the pain that we're anticipating with this IMF program going down the line, this is going to be challenging to ensure that John Mahama doesn't, become the option for voters because of the credibility that he's gained over the last 8 years.
Well, thank you very much, Evans. I think John tries to explain the issue, but it's just a difficult one. It's a question where I think the NDC will struggle with greatly to establish the credibility of the former president. Not that his personal, in terms of his personal life, that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about his political credibility in terms of being a leader and making promises and living up to it. If you take the NDC's proposition to Ghanaians from 2008, all the things they said they were going to do, part of which former President Mahama will be held accountable, I think, because he was the vice president and then eventually became the president. And then throughout that period, the first term, they couldn't achieve key components of that, key planks of their proposition, particularly with respect to employment. They didn't achieve anything. In fact, in the second term, the former president was frustrated when people asked him.
Richard? Yes, okay, I can hear you now.
Okay, so did you just lose me?
Yeah, I just lost you for a second.
Okay. So I was saying is that the NDC, led by the former president, has a real task of trying to establish credibility, and we're going to try and engage in that conversation to get them to prove that credibility, because we think that he doesn't. And I'll show you some evidence to that. And I was just talking about employment, which is a cardinal issue in this election, where a vast majority of our young people need employment, and the issue of a party putting forward a proposition that can address that concern. The NDC have made that promise several times in the past, but haven't been able to live up to the expectation, and not only failed to live up to the expectation, but became agitated when people were asking the legitimate question of what he promised, and they haven't seen the delivery of it. You recall the former president describing himself as not being a magician to put money in people's pockets, and that if people wanted money, or if they want to make a good living for themselves, they have to go out there and get a job. But if you look at the 2008 manifesto that the NDC put forward, they talked about creating jobs. And in fact, there's a particular proposition, if I can find it, I think on page 56 of that manifesto, one thing that the former president said in saying that he's not a magician, he said that people should get out there and find jobs. But in that statement, he said that the jobs that he have created, people don't have the skills to take them, right? But in that manifesto, the page 56 that I referred you to, the end.
I mean, Richard, I mean, are you recollecting this? Are you recollecting this correctly?
Sorry.
John, allow him to. This recollection of John Mahama making comments about the employment. You recollecting this correctly? Because I don't recall.
You don't recall what?
That John Mahama making the point about
he's created jobs that people don't have the skills
expertise for it. I mean, John Jinapa, please allow the man to clarify. I mean, I'm asking if you're recollecting that correctly.
Yes, I can just read a story to you if you want.
Please do.
And that story is on Ghana Web. I'm not sure what John is laughing at, but if you go to Ghana Web, the story is on is a story published, I think, November 2016. It said, "I am not a magician," Mahama tells unemployed graduate. Evans, you can read the story if you want, but I can find a specific place. But if you see the headline, the specific place that is, can find that. So he added, well, anyway, John can read that, but I'm not sure why he was laughing.
But your substantive, let's go to your substantive point. Your substantive point about employment?
The point I am making, I'm trying to link it to a promise they made in the 2008 manifesto, where they proposed that they were going to expand skills training facilities for urban youth. This is page 74 of their 2008 manifesto. Now, having made that promise and had a first term not fulfilled that, and then in 2016, when young people asking for employment and criticizing his government, he says that he's a magician to put money in their pocket. And in that story, if John then goes ahead to read it, he will see where I was referring to, where he was saying that much of the jobs in the labor market, employees or young people lack the skills to be able to take advantage of those jobs. Now, if what John is laughing at is to say that I say he's created jobs and people don't have skills for, it's implied. If you say that there are jobs and people lack the skills for that job, it means that you have created jobs and people don't have the skills to take the job. So that's the connection he needs to make. So the point I am making is that there is no credibility when it comes to solving the key problem. And this employment issue is critical because in the former president's acceptance speech, he talked about creating jobs. And we're saying that there's a record of making those promises of jobs and haven't been able to fulfill those promises. And so therefore, it's going to be difficult for him to establish credibility on that subject to the youth of this country, saying that I would come and create employment for you, when we know, based on his own commentary, about his ability to create jobs, and therefore people should be able to go find jobs for themselves. If they want to make an income, they must go out there, and that he has no magic to put money in their pocket.
Yeah, I mean, and stay with me. And I will have to take a quick break. I'll come back, John.
I want to deal with this employment.
I know you want to, but stay with me. I want to come back to that. And then, Dr. Choi Champon, when I return from the break, that last point there about track record, it's going to possibly be more important in this election next year than any other time in our Fourth Republic, because for the first time you will have two candidates on the ballot, regardless of who the MPP elect. If it's Alan or if it's Bawumia, both of them have been in government, they've been in cabinet, so they are going to come into the equation on their own record, right? And then you have a former president for the first time in our history also seeking re-election and competing with them. How important will that be? Because that dynamic we haven't seen before. We haven't seen. So how will this dynamic impact on the outcome? And then you raise the issue about John Mahama trying to deal with that credibility subject, also because of his 4-year record. How does he do that? When I come there, I'll take your views, and then I'll get John's reaction to the employment question. Stay with us. And thank you very much for still staying with us as we wrap up with the politics. And just before we went for the break, a very interesting proposition that was put forward about the records of both parties, which will be even more relevant this year than any other time in our history, really, because of the nature of the contest you're going to have. And one of the things that Richard Ehagba had brought up is the records on job creation, etc. And John, you wanted to respond to that?
No, but he hasn't given us any figure, except to say that there's a headline by Ghana Web that he heavily relies on a headline and say that John Mahama said A or B. I think what you would normally do, Richard, is to say that the unemployment rate, maybe in 2016, was X. Following our interventions, the unemployment rate in, say, 2022 is dropped by X amount. And I give you this document from World Bank that shows that unemployment is rather on the ascendancy. So, Richard, if you want us to go with this kind of debate, I'm sure that the people listening and watching would not enjoy it, because what this person said, what this person did not say, the media reported this. Let's deal with the concrete, cogent figures, statistical figures, the data, so that we can interrogate them and see whether we are making progress or not. As we speak, we don't even know your candidate. We don't know whether it will be Dr. Baumia, Kennedy Japan, Covenant Japan, Alan, etc. So it will be very difficult to even begin to pitch Mahama against a plethora, a lot of people who are still in the field. At least we know the track record of Dr. Baumia. We can tell, being the head of the economic management team, we can tell his track record today. At least we can assess him. Alan has been a minister, we can assess him. So let's see how it goes. Other than that, I think that President Mahama has done a lot of things that you can pinpoint. Maybe you didn't do slogan of 1D, 1F, but Atuabo gas processing plant alone saves us $350 million in terms of import substitution.
But you're as good as a politician, you know this, you're as good as your performance in your last term.
Yes.
Right? His last term ended in 2016, and that last term didn't end well.
And
that's what people will remember.
But I'm saying that last term is better than the current term. His inflation is better than today. His deficit is better than today. His track record when it comes to payment of coupons and debt servicing is better than today. Debt to GDP is better than today. Exchange rate is better than today. Every macro indicator that you take, if the last term is the standard, is better than today. The CD is depreciated by about 53%. When President Mahama was living, inflation had come down to about 15%. Today we are talking of food inflation of about 60%. President Mahama, throughout his tenure, never defaulted on bond payments. Our pensioners today do not even know their future. So I would prefer that kind of leadership than what we are witnessing today. If last terms are the standards of measure, look at where we are today. 0.5 months of import cover. Is that what you want? This country is bankrupt. That is a fact. We've even suspended repayment or debt servicing.
Yeah, the 600 million is in. So,
please, when we went for the IMF program, we never suspended repayment of coupons on our debt obligations. See where we are today. This country is in a hopeless state. To the extent that, look, without this IMF bailout, would have just crashed out. So clearly, if you want us to use last terms, we will be very, very happy. If you want us to use whatever figure, let's deal with absolute, measurable, quantifiable data.
So you're going to be, in your next year, you're going to be comparing Mahama's last term versus...
No, you brought it. I didn't. Okay. You said his last term.
In elections are one of records, right?
Yeah,
so you're saying
that's fine.
Okay.
But the people also assess the current situation. That's a fact.
Let me bring into a point. Dr. Should, that dynamic is going to be interesting. How would that, influence the outcome next year? And if you look at the John Mahama factor, he's obviously the overwhelming winner in the NDC primary. But he has a very obvious track record that he's going to go into next year with.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the point is that there is a resurgent NDC, right? The NDC of 2016 is not necessarily the NDC of 2023. Even when you look at some of the policy posturing and the announcement, if you look at some of the statements President Mahama has been making at different international and local fora, I am getting a bit more depth and I'm getting a bit more detail around that. But the other point is, and where I disagree with Richard, is that both of the parties, at least on the economic front, have a serious issue with credibility on the macro front, right? In the last term, 2016, we know what happened, Doomso and all the other related issues. Now we're talking about the, third restructuring, domestic exchange, and the ripple effect of that, and an IMF program as well. And this time around, it's also affecting, importantly, the middle class. So it's not just people down, but your typical middle class folks that traditionally may gravitate even towards, let's say, an MPP than an NDC. Many of them have been hit hard by this current, crisis. So I don't think that the debate or the substantive issues is about employment as Richard sought to portray. There are deeper issues around the economy, the cost of living, the crisis that we all find ourselves in, and the way many of the citizens would assess really is what is going to change fundamentally this time around in terms of your offering, in terms of your policies, and in terms of the substance, right, behind it. It's no longer enough just to make, promises, but people are going to be pinning you to the wall in terms of the substance underpinning those promises and whether there's actually even the fiscal space to contain it. So remember, we're still going to be in an IMF program until 2026. So anybody drafting a manifesto, anybody working on party, document, we need to factor all these things in the,
You raised such an important point. In other words, the IMF has already given a template for the two parties' manifestos going into the
limit to what they both can do, but they all have a serious issue of credibility that they need to address. It's not just an NDC issue, the MPP equally, and even in most recent memory, a lot of people, those that are like youth looking for jobs, yes, we get that. But the middle class, importantly, have seen significant losses on their investments, on their livelihood, particularly in the last 2 years. And that's something that for me, cannot be discounted.
And Mr. Hiagba, your response to that?
So, Evans, I was saying that, John didn't answer the question. The question you asked was specific about credibility. And I was trying to demonstrate to you that the former president promising that he would create jobs, in his acceptance speech, he mentioned some 13 items that he was going to work around. And that his credibility on that subject specifically cannot be trusted because of the things he said and done in the past. But John didn't answer that. Going back and talk about comparing the economy, that's a macro comparison that we can do. We're looking specifically at the candidacy of the former president and whether or not, your question, whether or not he can be trusted. So it's a specific analysis that we're doing. And so he didn't obviously answer the question. But what I'm trying to say is that the former president has to go through this hurdle of being trusted on the matter. The issues that are at play now, for which he's going to be campaigning, when he talks about the economy, yes, we can look at the economy. What was his position? What was his offering? And what was the outcome? And how does he explain that? Now, if you just look at what is happening today, which Dr. Tia Champon is canvassing, and I think John particularly is relying on, the current situation, I was trying to draw your attention earlier to say that if John is talking about the current situation we're in, then you need to text it for him properly. The context in which we are talking now is vastly different from what existed when the NDC recorded a 15.4% inflation that it's talking about, right? So if you have that conversation, we are not going to be absent in the conversation, right? We're going to be present. And we're going to remind Ghanaians that, look, what era he's talking about, these were the realities. And this era that he's comparing that era to, these are the circumstances, so that people will appreciate the two dynamics or the two environments vis-a-vis what obtained. There wasn't any COVID then. They tried to minimize it. There wasn't any Russia-Ukraine. And those are significant global happenings. And if you see how the IMF put it, talks about major external shock. So those major consequential external shock has the capacity of trumping any conditions that you had. In fact, if there were no...
Just a quick one, Richard. In 2014-15, you also had a slowdown in China, no? Didn't we have global commodity prices also dropping? I mean, I'm just throwing it into the conversation.
Yeah, but Dr. Theo, that has always been the situation because
so the big argument is that the external shocks would always be there. And in fact, it's going to even get much more worse in the years.
Exactly. So that's my point.
Right.
The point you are making about commodity prices falling, that threat is always going to be there and actually is still there.
Okay. I'll come to you. I just have less than 2 minutes. Just a second. Yes. Richard, go ahead. Just a minute to wrap up so that I can give my minute here to wrap up.
Okay, thank you. So the point I'm making to Dr. Theo's point is that yes, those external shocks will be there, but global shock in the nature that is reported in this report it's never been there. COVID has never been there. The direct effect of Russia-Ukraine has never been there. Even if you want to argue about Russia-Ukraine, you can argue about it. But I'm telling you that the catastrophic effect of COVID has never been there. So on top of the pre-existing global shocks that will come up and down, part of the economic cycle existed. Everybody had to work within that.
Yeah.
But here and now, you are talking about a serious extenuating circumstance being COVID-19 that you can control for and see that the MPP's performance compared to the NDC is nowhere comparable.
Okay. Richard, thank you very much. You have a minute. Sorry, Richard, thank you. 1 minute. You have a minute. Yes.
This is why government is investing as much as it is investing to try and provide our people with the skills that they need to enter the world of work.
So this is the Ghana website.
He added, if you sit at home and you don't take advantage of the opportunities, money is not going to magically appear in your pocket. So what government is doing is investing to create the situation so that as many of our people can take the opportunity as possible, and we are doing this in all sectors. This is verbatim. And Richard comes to sit here and say that he says that he's not a magician. Such blatant falsehood against the person of President Mahama. And that is what the NDC ought to watch going into this election, where people take President Mahama's otherwise well-intended statement, twist it, and blatantly misrepresent it. In any case, finally, employment. Your trump card is NAPCO. Richard, is that not your trump card? He said NAPCO is unprecedented. It would employ 100,000 people every year. It has collapsed. And let me just quote the IMF document. Large external shocks have exacerbated, and this is the operative word, pre-existing fiscal and debt vulnerabilities.
Okay.
Please read these documents.
Thank you very much, Jinapo. Thank you, Richard Ayagba. Thank you, Dr. Tuya Champon, and to all of you who watched us. Enjoy the rest of your weekend.